scary lady. Untamed, reactivating a missional form of discipleship. Alongside that, I read some stuff by Neil Cole. Neil Cole is an American, and while I was on sabbatical, I had the opportunity, there was a day conference in Nottingham. Those of you who are in triplets, then the whole prayer triplet stuff comes out of his writing. I read earlier, not on sabbatical, but there's another book by him called Organic Church, followed by Surprising Organic Leadership, and a book about disciple making. He's coming from a different kind of perspective, but saying some very similar things. And I will refer just to him very briefly later. Then I thought it'd be good to read some contrasting stuff. And so I read a book called Deep Church by Jim Belcher, which supposedly is a way between traditional church and missional church. Another book called Resourcing Mission by Helen Cameron. A book that I got out of the library called... I can't remember what it's called, but there's a slide with its title on. Total Church, which I will mention later. Some of you have come across Mark Stibbe and Andrew Williams' book Breakout, which is the story of St Andrew's, Chorley Wood and mission-shaped communities. If there's one book as a kind of way in, that's the one I would recommend. So go to Green Pastures tomorrow. I'm on 10%. Another missional writer and thinker is a guy called Alan Roxburgh. Missional map making, I may refer to that later. And then some theological reading. Chris Wright is, or was, the principal of all nations when we lived at, where did we used to live? Hoddesdon in Hertfordshire. And All Nations was just up the road. He's a good bloke. The mission of God, unlocking the Bible's grand narrative. And just exploring this idea that actually one of the ways of understanding the Bible is to understand it as the story of a missionary God, the God of mission. And actually that's the dominant theme of the Bible. Chris Wright's an Old Testament scholar, so a lot of that is Old Testament stuff, but again, beautifully written. I also took the opportunity to go to some places and do some things that I wouldn't have got the chance to do whilst I was here. I've explained about going to the Neil Cole conference. I also went on a church planting day organised by the Incarnate Network and Urban Expression. Urban Expression are replanting small communities of Christians into our inner cities. And I'll say something about them later. The Incarnate Network is a similar kind of network of church planters. And by churches, we immediately think of planting a congregation. Actually, they're doing it quite differently, as I will explain later. I went, and I'll talk about this, I went for a very scary 3 or 4 days to the church from scratch in Southend. Christine and John know their now second minister. Church from scratch is led by a guy whose name escapes me now. This is the trouble when you don't have full notes. Fascinating character. Peter Domine. Did somebody say that? Yeah, thank you. Peter Domine. Peter Domine is a fascinating guy. Southend is like Bible Belt. There are dozens, literally, of Baptist churches, but they reach the same kind of people. And some years ago, Peter is more, he's not a typical Baptist minister. And so they set him aside to try and develop a different kind of Baptist church, reaching the 18 to 35 age group. So he gathered a team around him, and they started, and after 6 weeks, there were 3 of them left. I don't know what happened. There was him and his wife and one other. He was on a home mission grant. So he was being paid, so I thought, we better do something. So Peter, being the kind of bloke he is, he already had enough friends who were not Christians to run an alpha course. So they ran an alpha course, and at the end of the alpha course, they realised they'd planted a church. And it met in their living room, about 20 people. And as they began to explore with these people, they realised actually they weren't interested in helping on another alpha course. By this time, Peter had another, guess what, 20 people with whom he could do an alpha course. So they, on a Thursday night or whatever, they started. So then they ended up with 2 congregations who don't meet on a Sunday And gradually they've multiplied these congregations. And these are people who you would not find in your average church. They are people from a lower social economic background, shall I put it that way, most of whom have had very troubled lives, either of alcohol addiction, sexual problems, some kind of addiction of some kind or another. And I think, as I've said to some of you, it's a really scary place to be. Because if you say to... I mean, what's our standard greeting? Clive, what's our standard greeting on a Sunday morning? Good morning, how are you? I'm fine. No, we don't use the word fine. But that's actually, it's a kind of greeting, isn't it? And in middle classness, we know how to respond. Hello, how are you? I'm fine, thank you. How are you? I'm fine, thank you, etc. If you say to one of these folks, hello, how are you? They tell you. And actually, that wasn't my intention of the question. And it's a completely different, it's a very honest, very different. And if we get time, and I've already waffled on too long, I'll tell you one story from there. There are a couple of other things that I went on a training weekend as well, run by Crucible, which is the training weekend for the urban expression folk, the people who are church planting into the most difficult places. And I'll tell you a story from there later on. But there's one specific area I want to explore with you, God as a missionary God. Is God really a missionary God? Is it true? Is it true that mission is not an activity, it's the very heartbeat and work of God? Abraham Heschel, a Jewish theologian, wrote a book about the Old Testament and Judaism, and he gives it this intriguing title, God in Search of Man. And actually, right, as Alan brought out this morning, you know, as soon as the fall comes, God's in. And it finds particular expression, doesn't it, in Genesis 12 and the covenant with Abraham. I'm going to bless you in order that what? You will be a blessing. Through you, I'm going to bless all nations. And this finds ultimate expression in Jesus. I should have said that, of course, the Mission of God book there, the thing he brings out beautifully is God's missional intention for his Old Testament people. You might take issue with Frost and Hirsch on a number of areas, but I think what they say about Jesus, no, they don't say anything new about Jesus, but actually they bring it out in such a way that for me, I think I have a different appreciation of who Jesus is than before. They bring out his humanity quite startlingly, his ordinariness, his sheer ordinariness as a human being, which means his presence and interest in the very ordinariness of our lives, which actually they stick a big pin, and you can hear it going in the super spirituality of some of our approaches to Jesus. They really rail against images like that. As Michael Frost provocatively says, who would follow a man who uses curling tongs? But actually sometimes our Jesus' feet never quite touched the ground. He was a real human being. And in heaven now is Jesus, who lived as a real human being. Michael Frost calls this the spooky Jesus. And then they take very seriously the divinity of Jesus. Now, we say that, but I think they apply it. I think they apply it in very helpful ways. One of the things they say is, and we would agree with this, but do we practice it, that the very pinnacle of the self-revelation of God is Jesus. He is the ultimate revelation of what God is like. And if we are to understand God, then we have to understand who Jesus is, and the rest of the Bible we interpret through that. You know, it's a bit like taking a pair, I don't know, of blue-coloured glasses and putting them on, and everything you see after that is blue-coloured, isn't it? And actually, we need to kind of put the Jesus glasses on as we read the Bible and as we read Old Testament and the rest of the New Testament. He is our source. He is the origin of our understanding of what Jesus is like. Okay, let's see that second clip. This is Alan Hirsch. This clip is a bit rambly. Okay, it lasts about 5 minutes, but again, it introduces the bloke to you, and he's talking about Jesus as Lord. No, it's the other one. Thank you.
The significance of Jesus for movements is very, very important. You cannot overstate that. The centerpiece around which the others orbit is the Jesus is Lord piece. I phrase Jesus is Lord because the movements themselves actually use that terminology, and it captures an incredible amount of theological density, as well as it's very light and can be sneezed. That is, it's an idea, well, it's three words. I mean, you can sneeze that anyway. Anyone can get that. And it's got a little, you can sing that thing, it's a slogan, Jesus is Lord. All great ideas, when they're really good ideas, are like viruses. That is, we get infected by them. They get hold of us. We become a carrier of a virus, like an idea, and then we, of course, being infected, we go and infect other people. So we sneeze on them. So I like the idea of the whole movement ideas that Jesus sneezed, which I rather like the phrase that, Jesus sneezed on a group of people in ancient Israel, and it's still sneezing out now, because the gospel, in a sense, travels like a virus. Jesus is Lord, of course, has got this capacity to be sneezed. It's a simple, what I call a simplex statement. It's simple because even a peasant can get it, a theologian can get it, but it takes a lifetime to live it out. In fact, none of us will ever kind of get to the depth of it, because it's really about the kingdom of God, or the sovereignty of God, or monotheism, as you might say it in the Bible, that the absolute claim of the one God over all his creation. So here you have is a worldview in a sentence. Actually, a worldview in 3 words, which is quite remarkable. And that's why it's kind of theologically dense enough to hold the movement together. So that's the heart of it, is that centerpiece. Jesus is Lord. Sociologists do call the early church and movements like them Jesus movements, because they have a very simple adherence to Christ that lies at the heart of it. A very uncluttered theology. It's not saying that that's the only theology we should have, but it's the central determining theology, the gateway to all other theologies that should inform all other ways of thinking about God. For us as Christians, the truth is Jesus is like God. But the greater truth is that God is like Jesus. The Christology should inform everything for us. And Christology is how we think of Jesus. It's the whole phenomenon of Jesus. Not just his death on our behalf, that's as vital and as atoning as that is, our salvation events, but also his life, his ministry, the incarnation, which we've lost a sense of what that means. The significance to mission is massive. We need to take the whole phenomenon of Jesus seriously. That's why it's center. Christology lies at the heart of the renewal of the church in any time and any place in which we find ourselves lost, identity crisis, struggling to know our cause and our function in the world and what this thing is all about. We go back to Jesus to find that out. Where else do we go? I mean, he's the founder. He gets defining rights. You take the words of Jesus seriously. Man, they call into question so many of the things that we take seriously. This is not a nice guy speaking. This is a Lord. And we've made him just into this decency cop. He's not that at all. He's a Lord and he's a master, and he challenges our idols, which are very many. The reason why we try and marginalize Jesus or domesticate him is because it's hard to live with a Lord. Lords are very difficult, right? They're masters. They claim absolute loyalty, particularly biblical ones. I think that behind any attempts to kind of moderate or change Jesus is that desire to kind of qualify the demands of discipleship on our lives. We just qualify him down until the lordship means nothing. So we can still worship Jesus, but he has no significant lordship, no impact upon my life. And I would suggest churches are masterful at this. Because we domesticate him, it's hard to live with the Lord. He's demanding. And you try and follow Jesus, the closer we get to him, the more dangerous he is to our middle-class sensibilities. And what we do is we slowly and surely take him out in every other sphere until he becomes just a religious God. God has no relevance to any other aspect, economic or political aspect of our lives, or any other things. The people of Israel struggle under the sovereignty or the kingship of God, and so does the church. And so even the church itself, in the book of Revelations, there's the famous Laodicean church where you have Jesus knocking on the door of the church, asking to come in. I mean, it's not about evangelism, Billy. Actually, it's about Jesus being locked outside of his church. You've got to ask the question, what's he doing on the outside when all the people are worshipping him on the inside? Because in actual fact, they've marginalized Jesus as reality out of the church. and they've retained a certain idea of Jesus, which they think is a modicum of civil religion on the inside. By the way, the Laodicean church is America, of course, because it's the church that they had no need of anything.